It was a bustling Friday morning at the SuperValue Mart in Riverbrook, Massachusetts, where life moved at its own steady rhythm between the old textile mills and modern shopping centers. Mary Stark stood behind register number 7, her practiced, hands moving with precision across the scanner, each beep marking another item processed with military efficiency. Though none of her customers could have guessed the connection, the 42-year-old cashier's brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her green store vest pristine, and her name tag polished to a shine that would have passed the strictest of inspections. Nobody would have imagined that just 3 years ago she had been Lieutenant Colonel Mary Stark, decorated combat veteran, leader of one of the most successful military intelligence units in Afghanistan, and recipient of the Bronze Star for valor under fire. The morning sun filtered through the store's large front windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors while early shoppers navigated their carts through the aisles. The store's familiar scent of fresh bread from the bakery mixed with the aroma of coffee from the in-store cafe, creating that distinct supermarket atmosphere that felt both commercial and homey at the same time. Outside, the late September breeze rustled through the maple trees that lined the parking lot, their leaves just beginning to hint at the autumn colors to come. Mary had chosen this job deliberately after retiring from the army, while her colleagues had moved on to lucrative defense contractor positions or government consultancy roles. She had sought something different, a return to the simplicity of civilian life, a chance to serve her community in a quieter way. The regularity of retail work, the daily interactions with people, and the structured environment helped ease her transition from military life. Each morning she arrived exactly 15 minutes early, just as she had done for morning briefings during her 20-year military career. Today, however, would test her patience, training, and character in ways she never expected. What began as a routine morning would soon transform into a situation that would reveal the true measure of a person. Not in the medals they've earned or the uniform they wear, but in how they handle moments of crisis and confrontation. None of the customers filling their carts or the staff stocking shelves could have predicted that by afternoon, this ordinary supermarket would become the stage for an extraordinary display of courage, humility, and the unexpected ways our past experiences prepare us for future challenges. The morning had started like any other. Mary had arrived at 6:45 a.m. for her 7:00 a.m. shift, parking her modest Honda Civic in the employee section at the far end of the lot. She'd taken her usual walk through the parking lot, noting with habitual vigilance the positions of shopping carts, the faces of early morning customers, and the delivery trucks backing up to the loading dock. These observations were second nature, skills honed through years of operational awareness that she couldn't simply switch off. Inside her locker in the break room, underneath her store vest, hung a small photograph, her unit in Afghanistan, standing proud before a Black Hawk helicopter. It was her private reminder of who she was, even if her current uniform consisted of khaki pants and a polyester vest instead of combat fatigues. She touched the photo briefly, as she did every morning, before closing the locker and heading to her register. The first few hours of her shift passed smoothly. Mary processed transactions with quiet efficiency, offering genuine but measured smiles to each customer. She helped elderly Mrs. Thompson find the correct change in her purse, assisted a young mother struggling with a fussy toddler, and guided a confused teenager through his first time using food stamps, all with the patient leadership she had once applied to guiding young soldiers through their first deployments. What Mary didn't know was that in just a few hours, an incident would unfold that would force her to draw upon every aspect of her military training, not in combat, but in a situation that would require equal measures of courage, quick thinking, and decisive action. As she straightened items in the candy display near her register, she had no way of knowing that her quiet morning was about to transform into something that would remind everyone in SuperValue Mart that heroes don't always wear uniforms, and that true character reveals itself not in the medals we wear, but in the choices we make when faced with unexpected challenges. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the conveyor's belts moved with their familiar rubber-on-metal sound, and customers continued their shopping, unaware that they were about to witness an event that would challenge their preconceptions and remind them that extraordinary individuals often hide in plain sight, serving their communities in the most unexpected ways. Mary Stark, the cashier at Register 7, was about to show them all that sometimes the most remarkable stories unfold in the most ordinary places, and that the qualities that make a hero, courage, dedication, and unwavering principle, don't disappear when the uniform comes off. As Mary processed another transaction, her mind briefly drifted to the path that had led her to this checkout counter. Born in a military family in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, she had grown up watching her father, Colonel James Stark, dedicate his life to serving his country. The base had been her playground, and the soldiers her extended family. The sound of reveille each morning, the sight of troops marching in formation, and the discipline that permeated every aspect of life had shaped her worldview from an early age. Her own military journey had begun at West Point, where she graduated near the top of her class in 2001. The events of September 11th occurred just months after her graduation, defining the course of her career and the wars she would fight. Over 2 decades of service, she had risen through the ranks, earning respect not through loud declarations of authority, but through quiet competence and unwavering dedication to her troops. The bronze star, resting in a shadow box at home, told only part of the story. During a critical intelligence operation in Kandahar province, her unit had come under heavy fire. Mary had not only coordinated the defensive response, but had also managed to save critical intelligence data that later prevented 3 major attacks on civilian targets. More importantly to her, she had brought every member of her team home alive. The citation spoke of exceptional leadership under extreme duress, but Mary remembered it more for the lessons it taught her about grace under pressure and the importance of maintaining clarity in chaos. Behind her calm exterior and the rhythmic beeping of her scanner lay a mind trained in tactical assessment and strategic thinking. Even now, she automatically noted the positions of security cameras, maintained awareness of exit routes, and kept a mental count of customers in her line. These habits, ingrained through years of operational planning, had become as natural as breathing. Her previous life seemed worlds away from the fluorescent-lit aisles of SuperValue Mart, yet Mary found unexpected parallels. The precision required in handling money reminded her of weapons maintenance. The need to remain calm during rush hours echoed the discipline required in combat situations. Even the store's inventory system shared similarities with military logistics. Everything had its place, its purpose, its proper procedure. The transition to civilian life hadn't been without its challenges. The first few months had been particularly difficult, marked by restless nights and a persistent feeling of disconnection. The mundane rhythm of civilian life had initially felt foreign, almost surreal, compared to the high-stakes environment she had known. But Mary had approached this challenge as she had every other, with determination, adaptability, and a clear sense of purpose. She had chosen retail deliberately, seeing it as an opportunity to serve her community in a different way. While some of her military colleagues had questioned her decision, viewing it as beneath her capabilities, Mary understood something they didn't. True service knew no rank or status. Whether leading troops in combat or helping an elderly customer find the right brand of coffee, the core principle remained the same: being there for others when they needed you. Her current manager, Tom Wilson, knew nothing of her military background. During her job interview, she had kept her resume deliberately sparse, listing only her recent civilian experience and education. When he had asked about the 20-year gap in her employment history, she had simply said she had served in the military, leaving out the details of her rank and accomplishments. She wasn't ashamed of her service, far from it, but she wanted to earn respect for who she was now, not for who she had been. The store uniform, while different from her previous attire, was worn with the same attention to detail that had once governed her military appearance. Her name tag was always perfectly straight, her vest free of wrinkles, her appearance professional and approachable. These small disciplines were more than mere habits. They were a continuation of the standards she had lived by for 2 decades. Sometimes, during quiet moments between customers, Mary would catch glimpses of her reflection in the store's windows. The person staring back, a supermarket cashier, in a simple green vest, seemed far removed from the lieutenant colonel who had once briefed generals and led crucial missions. Yet she knew that underneath the civilian exterior, the core of who she was remained unchanged. The leadership principles, the commitment to excellence, the dedication to service, these qualities weren't confined to any uniform or rank. As the morning wore on, Mary continued her duties with characteristic precision, unaware that her background, which she had so carefully kept private, would soon become central to a situation that would challenge everything she had learned in both her military and civilian lives. The skills and experiences she had accumulated over years of service were about to prove invaluable in an unexpected way, demonstrating that sometimes the most important battles we fight aren't on foreign soil, but in the everyday moments where character and courage intersect with ordinary life. The late morning rush was beginning to build at SuperValue Mart, with shopping carts squeaking across the freshly waxed floors and the steady hum of conversation growing louder. Mary's line at Register 7 had started to lengthen, a mix of hurried professionals on their lunch breaks and regular customers doing their weekly shopping. She maintained her efficient pace, each movement precise and purposeful, treating every transaction with the same attention to detail she had once applied to mission planning. Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher who came in every Friday, approached the counter with her carefully organized coupons and reusable bags. "Good morning, Mary," she smiled warmly, arranging her items on the conveyor belt with methodical care. "I noticed you helped Tommy with his fundraiser last week. That was very kind of you." Mary nodded appreciatively, remembering how she'd helped the young Boy Scout set up his popcorn sale table outside the store, giving him tips on organization and presentation that she'd learned from years of military logistics. As she scanned Mrs. Henderson's groceries, Mary's trained eye caught movement near the store's entrance. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit had just walked in, talking loudly on his phone about some business merger. Something about his demeanor triggered her instincts, honed through years of reading people in high-pressure situations. His body language spoke of barely contained frustration, the kind that often preceded confrontation in her experience. The line at her register continued to grow, and Mary could feel the mounting tension from customers who were running late for their lunch breaks. She maintained her steady pace, neither rushing nor slowing, just as she had learned to do during complex operations where speed had to be balanced with precision. Each item was scanned with practiced efficiency, each interaction handled with professional courtesy, no matter how impatient the customer. Through the store's front windows, Mary could see dark clouds gathering, promising an afternoon storm. The changing weather seemed to push more people into the store, seeking to finish their shopping before the rain began. The mechanical whir of the sliding doors became more frequent, matching the quickening pace of customer traffic. She made A mental note to ensure the mat near her register stayed dry, situational awareness that had become second nature during her military career. The well-dressed man she had noticed earlier was now making his way through the aisles, still engaged in his heated phone conversation. His shopping basket swung carelessly from one arm as he grabbed items almost at random, his attention clearly elsewhere. Mary watched peripherally as he moved closer to her line, his voice growing increasingly agitated with each passing moment. Between customers, Mary quickly straightened the displays near her register. Candy bars, magazines, last-minute impulse, items, everything in its place. Just as she had learned in the military, organization breeds efficiency, efficiency saves time, and in some situations, time saves lives. While this wasn't a combat zone, the principles of order and preparation remained valuable. The air conditioning hummed overhead, fighting against the humidity that had begun to seep in through the frequently opening doors. Mary could feel a familiar tension building in her shoulders, the same kind she used to experience before a difficult operation. Her instincts, refined through countless high-stress situations, were telling her that this ordinary day was about to become considerably less routine. Behind her, the store's intercom crackled to life, announcing a price check at Register 3. The mundane announcement reminded her of radio communications during missions, different context, same principle of clear, concise information transfer. She automatically adjusted her hearing to filter out the background noise while remaining alert to any important announcements or signs of disturbance. The well-dressed man had now joined her line, standing impatiently behind 3 other customers. His phone conversation had ended, but his agitation seemed to have only increased. He checked his expensive watch repeatedly, sighing loudly and shifting his weight from foot to foot. Mary recognized these signs of mounting frustration. She had seen similar behavior in high-pressure military situations where tension built up before inevitable confrontation. As she finished with her current customer, Mary took a moment to survey the situation. The man was now second in line, his basket filled with hastily selected items, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the shopping basket's handle. The elderly woman between them was moving slowly, carefully counting out exact change for her purchase. Mary could practically feel the businessman's frustration radiating forward like heat waves off desert sand. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and a few drops of rain began to patter against the store's large windows. The afternoon storm was rolling in faster than expected, adding another layer of urgency to the atmosphere. Several customers glanced nervously at the darkening sky, their movements becoming more hurried, their patience wearing thinner. Mary maintained her composure, drawing on years of experience in managing high-stress situations. She knew that the next few minutes would require all of her professional skills, both military and civilian. The tension was building like a pressure cooker, and soon something would have to give. She straightened her name tag, took a deep breath, and prepared to face whatever challenge was coming her way, just as she had done countless times before in far more dangerous situations. The elderly woman in front of the businessman finally finished her transaction, carefully tucking her receipt into her worn leather wallet. As she slowly gathered her bags, the well-dressed man let out an exaggerated sigh, checking his watch for the 5th time in 2 minutes. Mary could feel the tension building like a thunderhead, but she maintained her professional demeanor, treating the elderly customer with the same respect and patience she had shown all morning. "Good afternoon, sir," Mary greeted the businessman as he stepped forward, her voice carrying the same calm authority she had used to brief high-ranking officials. He responded by roughly dumping his basket of items onto the conveyor belt, several products tumbling onto their sides. A box of premium cereal fell off the belt entirely, landing on the floor with a dull thud. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, not even looking at Mary. "I've been standing in line for 10 minutes. Don't you people know how to move things along? Some of us have actual important jobs to get back to." His emphasis on the word actual carried a clear tone of condescension, his gaze fixed on his phone rather than acknowledging Mary's presence. Mary began scanning his items with the same efficiency she'd maintained all day, neither slowing down nor speeding up in response to his rudeness. She had faced far more intimidating situations than an impatient customer. Taliban commanders, sandstorms in the Hindu Kush, complex extraction operations under heavy fire. This man's attitude was hardly going to rattle her. 20 years of military service taught me quite a bit about efficiency, sir, she replied evenly, continuing to scan and bag his groceries. "Would you like paper or plastic today?" The man barely glanced up from his phone, missing entirely the significance of what she had just said. "Whatever's fastest," he growled, then suddenly looked up with a scowl. "Wait, did you just say something about military service? Please, I suppose next you'll tell me you were a general." His laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Look, just ring up my items. I don't need your life story or your excuses about why this is taking so long." Several customers in line shifted uncomfortably, and Mary noticed Tom Wilson, the store manager, watching from nearby. She caught his eye and gave a slight shake of her head. She didn't need intervention. She'd handled far worse situations with far higher stakes. "Your total comes to $157.84, Mary stated calmly, maintaining her professional composure. The man thrust his credit card at her without looking up from his phone, where he had resumed typing furiously. As she processed the payment, he continued his tirade. "You know what your problem is," he said, finally looking directly at her. "You people in these jobs, you have no idea what real responsibility looks like, no concept of what it means to make actual decisions that matter. I manage million-dollar accounts. I deal with real pressure. This," he gestured dismissively at her register, "this is just pushing buttons and collecting a paycheck." Mary handed him his receipt with the same steady hand that had once diffused explosive situations in combat zones. "Thank you for shopping with us today, sir. Have a good afternoon." Her voice remained level, professional, showing no sign of the thoughts running through her mind. Memories of coordinating emergency evacuations, of making split-second decisions that determined whether her team lived or died, of receiving the Bronze Star for actions that would never be fully declassified. The man snatched the receipt from her hand, crumpling it as he stuffed it into his pocket. "Yeah, whatever. Maybe if you'd made something of yourself, you wouldn't be stuck in a dead-end job like this. Ever think of that?" He gathered his bags roughly, nearly dropping one in his aggressive haste. A younger cashier at the next register, Jenny, looked over with a mixture of sympathy and anger on her face. She had witnessed similar scenes before, but never with someone who handled it with such composure as Mary. The other customers in line were showing various signs of discomfort and disapproval, some openly glaring at the businessman. Mary straightened her name tag, a habit that echoed adjusting her uniform before military inspections. "Sir, I've made plenty of myself. My current position reflects a choice, not a limitation. Now, is there anything else I can help you with today?" The measured calm in her voice was the same tone she had used during tense negotiations with local tribal leaders, where one wrong word could spark a conflict. The businessman opened his mouth to respond, his face reddening with either embarrassment or further anger. But before he could speak, a loud crash from the front of the store drew everyone's attention. The tension that had been building between Mary and the rude customer was about to be redirected in a way that neither of them could have anticipated, and Mary's true capabilities would soon become apparent to everyone in the store, including her most vocal critic. Mary felt the familiar surge of adrenaline at the sound of breaking glass, her body instinctively shifting into the alert stance that had served her through countless combat situations. For a split second, she was transported back to her last deployment. The crack of gunfire, the weight of her tactical gear, the lives of her unit depending on her quick decisions. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was Register 7 at SuperValue Mart, and she was wearing a green vest instead of combat fatigues. The businessman, momentarily distracted from his tirade, turned toward the sound. Mary used these precious seconds to center herself, drawing upon the meditation techniques she'd learned during her post-deployment transition. Her father's words echoed in her mind, words he'd shared after her first difficult mission. True strength isn't in showing power, it's in knowing when and how to use it. Through the store's front windows, the gathering storm had darkened the sky to an ominous grey, making the fluorescent lights seem harsher and more artificial. Thunder rolled outside, but Mary's attention remained focused on the source of the crash. Her military training had taught her to prioritize threats, to assess situations before acting, to maintain situational awareness even when others panicked. She thought about the shadow box on her mantel at home, containing her bronze star and other decorations. Next to it sat a photo of her unit, taken just days before the mission that would earn her that medal. They had faced uncertainty then too, but training and trust in each other had carried them through. Now standing behind her register, Mary felt that same sense of responsibility, not to a military unit this time, but to her colleagues and customers. The businessman's words still hung in the air, stuck in a dead-end job, pushing buttons and collecting a paycheck. She had heard similar dismissive comments before, both from customers and even some old military colleagues who couldn't understand her choice to work retail after retirement. They didn't understand that service took many forms, that the skills learned in combat could be just as valuable in civilian life, that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with patience and wisdom. Mary remembered her last day in uniform, turning in her command. She had stood before her unit one final time, seeing in their eyes the same respect she had worked so hard to earn. Leadership isn't about the rank on your shoulder, she had told them. It's about being ready to step up when others step back. Those words felt particularly relevant now, as she sensed that whatever had caused that crash might require exactly that kind of leadership. Her hands moved automatically to straighten her name tag, a gesture that echoed thousands of uniform inspections. The familiar motion helped ground her in the present moment, while her mind rapidly assessed potential scenarios and responses. Years of military planning had taught her to always have contingencies ready, to expect the unexpected, to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. The businessman was still standing at her register, his earlier arrogance temporarily forgotten as he stared toward the front of the store. Mary noticed his hand trembling slightly as he held his shopping bags, a subtle tell she might have missed if not for years of reading body language during high-stakes negotiations. Fear often hid behind bluster and aggression. She had learned that lesson well during her deployments. Around them, other customers and staff had also frozen in place, creating that eerie stillness that often preceded chaos. Mary recognized this moment, the calm before the storm, that critical pause where decisions made in seconds could have long-lasting consequences. She had experienced it before firefights, before critical operations, before moments that would later be recorded in citation papers and mission reports. Thunder cracked again outside, closer this time, and the store's lights flickered briefly. Mary's mind flashed to power outages during operations in remote villages, to nights when darkness meant both cover and danger. But here, in the fluorescent-lit aisles of SuperValue Mart, different skills would be needed. The same quick thinking, yes, the same calm under pressure, but applied to civilian crisis rather than military conflict. The businessman cleared his throat, perhaps preparing to resume. His complaints, But Mary was already focusing beyond him, her senses alert for any further sounds or signs of trouble. Her previous training had ingrained in her the importance of identifying the nature of a threat before responding. Was that crash an accident, a security issue, a medical emergency? Each scenario would require a different approach, a different set of skills from her vast experience. She thought of her locker in the break room with its hidden photo of her unit. They had faced uncertainty together, had learned to trust each other's instincts, to read situations and respond as one. Now she stood alone at her register, but those lessons, those experiences, that training, it was all still there, ready to be called upon when needed. Whatever had caused that crash, Mary knew she was prepared to handle it, not despite being a cashier, but because she was so much more than just that. 2 security guards rushed past Mary's register, their radios crackling with urgent communications. A shout from the front of the store cut through the general murmur. "He's got a gun!" The words sent an immediate ripple of panic through the customers. Some ducked behind shelves, while others stood frozen in place, uncertain whether to run or hide. The businessman who had been berating Mary moments ago dropped his shopping bags, his face draining of color. Mary's military training kicked in instantly, her mind shifting into the familiar pattern of tactical assessment. Through the gaps, between checkout aisles, she could see a man in a black hoodie near the customer service desk, holding what appeared to be a semi-automatic pistol. His movements were erratic, suggesting either drug use or extreme agitation. 2 employees stood with their hands raised, while a third lay on the floor near the shattered glass of a display case, the source of the earlier crash. "Nobody move!" the gunman shouted, his voice carrying a tremor that Mary recognized as fear rather than confidence. "Empty the registers! All of them!" He gestured wildly with the weapon, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. The store manager, Tom Wilson, was attempting to calm the situation, his hands raised as he slowly approached the customer service desk. Mary quickly assessed the situation, drawing upon her experience in hostile territories. The gunman's positioning, his nervous energy, the way he kept looking over his shoulder, all indicated this was likely an amateur, desperate rather than calculated. Those types were often the most dangerous, more likely to make fatal mistakes due to panic. The store had filled with the kind of tense silence she remembered from combat zones, that peculiar quiet where every small sound seemed magnified. A child's whimper from 2 aisles over, the hum of the refrigeration units, the distant roll of thunder as the storm outside intensified. The businessman who had been so confrontational moments ago was now crouched behind her register, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible terror. Mary noticed several critical details simultaneously, her mind processing the scene with military precision. The gunman's weapon appeared to be a Glock 19, and based on his grip and stance, he wasn't professionally trained. The security guards, positioned near the entrance, were armed only with tasers, standard policy for most retail establishments. Most crucially, she spotted a young mother with 2 small children trapped in the line of fire, trying to quietly edge toward the exit. Time seemed to slow down, just as it had during firefights in Afghanistan. Mary knew she had perhaps 30 seconds to act before the situation escalated beyond control. The gunman's agitation was increasing. She could see it in the way his movements became more jerky, more unpredictable. Tom was still trying to talk him down, but his words seemed to be having the opposite effect. "I said empty the registers!" the gunman screamed, firing a shot into the ceiling. The sound reverberated through the store, followed by screams and the sound of running feet. Fragments of acoustic tile rained down, adding to the chaos. The young mother instinctively covered her children, making herself more visible in the process. Mary's combat-honed instincts were screaming at her to take action, but she forced herself to remain still, to observe, to plan. She had learned the hard way in Afghanistan that rushing in without proper assessment could make situations worse. The layout of the store, which she had unconsciously memorized over months of working there, suddenly became as crucial as any. Battlefield terrain map. The gunman's position gave him a clear view of the main exits, but she knew there was a blind spot behind the customer service desk, a detail she had noted during her first week on the job, another habit carried over from her military days. The storm outside had darkened the store's windows, eliminating the risk of glare or backlighting that could compromise movement. Through the chaos, Mary maintained her outward calm, even as her mind raced through scenarios and options. She could see the security cameras above, knowing that whatever happened next would be recorded. Just like mission documentation, she thought grimly. Every action would need to be justified, explained, defended if necessary. The businessman huddled behind. Her register let out a quiet sob, drawing her attention momentarily. The same man who had dismissed her as just a cashier was now looking at her with desperate hope, perhaps sensing in her calm demeanor something he hadn't noticed before. Mary gave him a small nod, the same reassuring gesture she had often used with nervous young recruits before their first combat mission. The gunman was now demanding that Tom open the store's safe, his voice rising in pitch and urgency. Mary knew from experience that this was the most dangerous moment, when desperation began to override whatever plan he had started with. She could see Tom's hands shaking as he tried to explain the time delay lock system, each word potentially pushing the gunman closer to violence. The storm outside finally broke in earnest, rain drumming against the roof and windows. Another crack of thunder made several customers jump, and the gunman spun toward the sound, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, Mary made her decision. Like countless times before in combat situations, she knew that action, properly planned and executed, was less risky than allowing the situation to deteriorate further. In one fluid motion, Mary quietly removed her store vest and name tag, laying them carefully on her register. The movement was deliberate, controlled, the same way she had once prepared for critical operations. She knew she had only one chance to end this situation without casualties, and every detail mattered. The weight of years of combat experience settled over her like invisible armor, replacing the civilian uncertainty with military precision. Through the gaps between checkout stands, she could track the gunman's position. His attention was still focused on Tom and the safe, his back, partially, turned to her position. The layout she had unconsciously memorized over months of working at SuperValue Mart now became as vital as any combat terrain map. She noted the distance, approximately 40 feet, and the potential obstacles between them. The fallen display case had scattered broken glass across the floor, which could either help or hinder her approach. Mary caught Jenny's eye at the next register and gave her a subtle hand signal, one that would have been instantly recognized by her military unit, but here served a simple purpose. "Stay down." The young cashier nodded almost imperceptibly, then slowly sank behind her counter, pulling an elderly customer down with her. The businessman who had berated Mary earlier watched her with wide eyes, his face pale, all traces of his previous arrogance gone. Drawing upon her CQC, close quarters combat training, Mary began moving silently along the edge of the checkout area. Her footsteps were measured, precise, a technique she had mastered during night operations in Afghanistan. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the storm continued to rage outside, providing cover for any small sounds she might make. The gunman was growing more agitated, his demands becoming more incoherent as Tom struggled to explain why he couldn't open the safe immediately. 25 feet. Mary moved like a shadow, her mind clear and focused. She remembered similar moments during her military service, the heightened awareness, the perfect clarity that came in critical situations. The skills she had learned in the military had become part of her muscle memory, as natural as breathing. Each step brought her closer to the gunman, who remained unaware of her approach. 15 feet. She could now see the sweat on the back of his neck, the tremor in his gun hand. His whole posture screamed amateur, the way he held the weapon, his unstable stance, the constant shifting of his weight from foot to foot. In some ways, this made him more dangerous than a trained opponent. Desperation and inexperience were often a deadly combination. 10 feet. The young mother with her children was still trapped in the danger zone, trying to keep her little ones quiet. Their eyes met briefly, and Mary gave her the same reassuring nod she had given countless civilians. In war zones, the mother's grip on her children tightened, understanding passing between them without words. 5 feet. Mary could now hear the gunman's ragged breathing, could see the safety was off on his Glock. One wrong move, one unexpected sound, and the situation could turn deadly in an instant. She thought of her unit in Afghanistan, of all the times they had faced danger together. Now she stood alone, but their training, their spirit, moved with her. In that final moment before action, time seemed to stretch out. Mary saw everything with crystal clarity, the terrified faces of the customers, Tom's shaking hands, the gunman's finger tensing on the trigger. She remembered her father's words from years ago. The hardest part of courage is not the action itself, but the moment just before, when you have to decide to act. 3 feet. The gunman sensed something and began to turn, but Mary was already moving, her body responding with the speed and precision of thousands of hours of training. Her right hand shot out, striking the pressure point at the base of his thumb, while her left hand simultaneously grabbed the slide of the pistol. The gun discharged harmlessly into the floor as she used his own momentum against him, executing a perfect disarming technique that had been drilled into her during countless training sessions. The gunman's surprise worked to her advantage. Before he could react, she had him on the ground, her knee in the small of his back, his arm locked in a control hold that she could maintain indefinitely without causing permanent damage. The gun skittered across the floor, well out of reach. The entire takedown had taken less than 3 seconds. "Security!" Mary called out, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. The 2 guards, who had been watching in stunned amazement, rushed forward to assist. She maintained the hold until they had the suspect properly restrained, then smoothly rolled to her feet, automatically scanning for secondary threats, another habit from her combat days. The store erupted in a mixture of cheers, sobs, and exclamations of relief. The young mother hugged her children tightly, tears streaming down her face. Tom stood at the customer service desk, mouth agape, still trying to process what he had just witnessed. And the businessman who had dismissed her capabilities earlier sat slumped against the register, staring at her with a mixture of awe and shame. Mary stood tall, her bearing unmistakably military, despite her civilian clothes. The training, the experience, the leadership that had earned her a Bronze Star. It had all come together in those crucial moments. She had acted not as a cashier, but as what she had always been, a highly trained combat veteran who had sworn to protect others, regardless of the uniform she wore. The aftermath of the incident unfolded with the organized chaos Mary remembered from post-operation scenarios. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as squad cars converged on the shopping center. Rain continued to pour outside, creating a surreal backdrop to the scene inside SuperValue Mart. Customers emerged from their hiding places behind shelves and counters, many still shaking, others crying with relief. Store manager Tom Wilson had finally regained his composure and was working with Jenny to coordinate the evacuation of customers through the side exit, away from the area where the security guards were detaining the would-be robber. Mary stood nearby, maintaining a vigilant watch over the situation. Old habits died hard. She noticed how the guards had properly secured the weapon and were keeping the suspect facing away from potential escape routes, nodding slightly in approval. The young mother with the two children approached Mary, still trembling but composed. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking, "when he pointed that gun. My babies." She pulled her children closer to her sides. The younger one, no more than 4, looked up at Mary with wide eyes, clutching a stuffed animal that had fallen during the chaos. Mary knelt down to the child's level, just as she had done countless times with children in war-torn villages. "Is this your brave friend?" she asked softly, gesturing to the stuffed bear. The child nodded, some of the fear leaving their eyes. "Well, you were both very brave today," Mary said, her voice gentle but steady. The mother wiped tears from her eyes, mouthing another silent "thank you" as they were escorted toward the exit by Jenny. The first police officers arrived, their raincoats dripping on the polished floor as they entered with weapons drawn. Mary immediately raised her hands slightly, knowing the confusion that often accompanied first responders entering an active scene. "Suspect is secured," she called out in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the store. "2 security. Personnel have him in custody near the customer service desk. No injuries. Weapon is secured." The officers paused, surprised by the professional assessment. One of them, a sergeant based on his insignia, approached Mary while his colleagues moved to secure the scene. "You military?" he asked, holstering his weapon as he recognized a fellow professional. Mary nodded, keeping her response brief and focused on the relevant details, just as she would have done during a mission debrief. "Lieutenant Colonel Mary Stark, retired. I work here as a cashier." Suspect appeared untrained, likely desperate rather than professional. Entered at approximately 14:35 hours, fired 1 shot into the ceiling before attempting to access the safe. No casualties, minimal property damage. The sergeant nodded appreciatively at the precise report, pulling out his notebook. Meanwhile, the businessman who had earlier belittled Mary stood awkwardly nearby, his expensive suit wrinkled from hiding behind the register, his face a mask of embarrassment and awe. He kept opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again, seemingly unable to find the right words. Mary caught his eye briefly, but remained focused on providing information to the police. More officers arrived, along with detectives and crime scene technicians. The store quickly filled with law enforcement personnel, documenting the scene, taking statements, and collecting evidence. Mary noticed one of the technicians photographing the bullet hole in the ceiling and the scattered glass from the broken display case, methodically creating a record of events. Tom approached Mary, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. We had no idea," he stammered. "All this time, a lieutenant colonel. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Mary turned to him with a small smile, the same one she had given young officers who were learning that rank wasn't what made a leader. "It wasn't relevant to operating a cash register, Tom," she replied simply. "I chose this job because I wanted something different after retirement. Something that still let me serve the community, just in a different way." She paused, then added, with a touch of humor, "Though I have to admit, this wasn't exactly what I had in mind." The store's automatic doors kept opening and closing as more personnel arrived. Mary could hear fragments of radio communications, the squawk of police bands, mixing with the continuing rumble of thunder outside. The scene reminded her of the organized chaos following operations overseas, different context, same fundamental patterns of professional response to crisis. A detective approached, introducing herself as Detective Martinez. "The security footage is remarkable," she said, looking at Mary with professional respect. "That takedown was textbook perfect. Where did you serve?" As Mary began to answer, she noticed the businessman edging closer, obviously listening while pretending to check his phone. His earlier condescension had been replaced by an almost childlike curiosity. "Afghanistan primarily," Mary replied. 20 years total service, retired as lieutenant colonel, led intelligence operations, among other things. She kept the details, vague habits of operational security, still ingrained after all these years. Detective Martinez nodded understanding, then produced her card. "We'll need a full statement, of course," she said, "but I wanted to let you know you probably saved several lives today. Not everyone with military training could have handled that situation so cleanly." Mary accepted the card with a quiet thank you, remembering similar commendations after successful missions. The circumstances were different, but the fundamental truth remained the same. Training and experience, properly applied, saved lives. The store gradually emptied of customers as police finished taking statements, leaving behind a strange quiet, broken only by the continued rumble of thunder and the clicks of crime scene photographers' cameras. Mary had retrieved her store vest and name tag from Register 7, smoothing them out with the same care she once gave to her uniform. As she prepared to put the vest back on, she felt a hesitant tap on her shoulder. It was the businessman, his expensive suit still wrinkled, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved. I need to apologize," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I said earlier, about this being a dead-end job, about you not knowing real responsibility." He trailed off, visibly struggling with his words. Mary watched him, calmly, the same way she had observed countless people coming to terms with their misjudgments during her military career. "I've spent my entire career climbing the corporate ladder," he continued, his voice growing stronger but more humble. "I've judged my success by the size of my office, the number of people under my command, my 7-figure salary." He laughed, bitterly. "I walked in here thinking I was somehow better than everyone else because of those things. And then, when it really mattered, when lives were actually on the line, I was hiding behind a register while you—" Mary held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Mr. Davidson," he supplied. "James Davidson." "Mr. Davidson, what happened?" "Today isn't about status or salary or position. It's about service, about being ready to help others when the moment calls for it. That readiness can come in many forms, whether it's scanning groceries efficiently so a busy mother can get home to her children, or handling a more critical situation like today." Tom Wilson approached them, carrying a framed photograph that usually hung in the break room. "I think this belongs out here now," he said, showing them the picture. It was from Veterans Day the previous year, when Mary had quietly placed a small flag and flower arrangement by the store's entrance. No one had known then that she was honoring her own service as much as others. "Mary," Tom continued, his voice thick with emotion, "I know this probably isn't the best time, but I need to say something too. We've been so focused on customer service metrics and sales figures that we completely missed the incredible person working Register 7. The leadership skills you've shown even before today, how you mentor our younger staff, how you handle difficult situations. It all makes sense now." The businessman Davidson nodded vigorously. "That's exactly it. We see someone in a store vest and we make assumptions. We forget that every person has a story, has experience, has value that goes far beyond their current role." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I manage a team of 50 people, but I've never had to make a split-second decision that could mean life or death. I've never had to—" Mary adjusted her name tag, a gesture that now seemed to carry new meaning to those watching. "Every role has its importance, Mr. Davidson. The skills I learned in the military, leadership, crisis management, quick decision-making, they're valuable everywhere, not just in combat. Sometimes they're needed at a cash register, sometimes in a boardroom, sometimes in an emergency. Detective Martinez returned with some final questions, and Mary noticed how both Tom and Davidson stepped back respectfully, giving her space to provide her statement. The detective's questions were precise, professional, focused on the tactical aspects of the incident. Mary responded with the same clarity she had used in military debriefings, describing the sequence of events, her assessment of the situation, and the factors that influenced her decisions. "One last thing," Martinez said, closing her notebook. "The suspect had prior convictions. If this had gone differently—" She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Lives had been saved today because someone with the right training had been in the right place at the right time. Tom cleared his throat. "Speaking of being in the right place, Mary, I know you chose to work here and we're honored that you did. But after today, well, would you consider a position with more responsibility? Our regional security coordinator is retiring next month, and with your background—" Mary smiled, remembering similar offers of promotion during her military career. "Thank you, Tom, but I'd like to stay where I am for now. There's value in every position, and honestly, I enjoy working with our customers, helping in small ways every day." She paused, then added, "Though I'm happy to help train the staff in basic security awareness, if you're interested." Davidson, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "You know, I was in here looking for a quick lunch, annoyed at having to wait in line. But I think I found something much more valuable. A lesson in humility and real leadership." He straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed more habitual than necessary given his rumpled appearance. Would you be willing to speak to my team sometime? Not about today specifically, but about leadership, about service, about the things that really matter." Mary considered the request, seeing an opportunity to bridge the gap between military and civilian perspectives on leadership. "I'd be happy to, Mr. Davidson. After all, good leadership principles are universal. Whether you're leading troops in combat, managing a corporate team, or yes, even running a grocery store checkout line." News of the incident spread quickly through the community. By the following morning, local news vans had set up outside SuperValue Mart, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern totems. Mary arrived for her regular shift, 15 minutes early as always, to find a small crowd of reporters waiting near the employee entrance. Their cameras turned toward her as she approached, but she walked past them with the same quiet dignity she had maintained through countless military ceremonies. Inside the break room, a newspaper lay open on the table. The headline read, "Retired Lieutenant Colonel thwarts armed robbery. Supermarket cashier revealed as decorated veteran." Below it was a security camera still showing Mary in the moment of the takedown, her movements precise and controlled despite the chaos around her. Jenny had already highlighted certain passages, demonstrating that heroism knows no uniform, and challenging societal assumptions about veterans in civilian roles. On the break room bulletin board, someone had pinned up a series of social media posts that were going viral. One showed a side-by-side comparison. Mary at her register in her SuperValue Mart vest and an old photo from her military days, standing proud in her dress uniform adorned with medals. The caption read, "Heroes walk among us. Remember this next time you think you know someone's story." Tom met her at the time clock, holding a stack of messages. "The mayor's office called," he said, still sounding somewhat awestruck. "They want to present you with a civilian service medal. And there's been calls from veterans organizations, schools wanting you to speak, even a morning show in New York." He trailed off as Mary raised her hand. "Tom," she said gently, "I appreciate all of this, but I'd really just like to get to my register. Our customers are waiting." She pointed through the window where a line was already forming, longer than usual, as people hoped to catch a glimpse of the hero cashier, as some news outlets had dubbed her. But before she could head to her station, Jenny rushed in, waving her phone excitedly. "Mary, have you seen this?" She held up the screen, showing a social media post from none other than James Davidson, the businessman who had belittled her the day before. His post had already gathered thousands of shares. Yesterday, I walked into a supermarket feeling important because of my job title and salary. I looked down on a cashier, judging her life choices, believing I knew her worth based on her position. That cashier turned out to be a retired lieutenant colonel who saved dozens of lives, including mine, when an armed robbery went wrong. The lesson I learned about prejudice, assumption, and true leadership will stay with me forever. Humility lesson. Real heroes. Mary read the post quietly, then handed the phone back to Jenny. "Well," she said with a small smile, "at least something good came from all this." She reached into her locker and touched the photo of her unit, a private moment of reflection before facing the public attention outside. The morning proved busier than usual. Customers lingered at her register, some trying to engage her in conversation about her military service, others simply wanting to shake her hand or say thank you. Mary handled each interaction with grace, neither encouraging nor dismissing the attention, focused instead on providing the same efficient, professional service she always had. Around mid-morning, a group of veterans from the local VFW post came in, each wearing their service caps. They stood in her line, waiting patiently, and when they reached her register, the eldest among them, wearing a career service ribbon, snapped to attention and saluted. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said formally, "thank you for showing them what we're made of." Mary returned the salute with precision, honoring both his service and the gesture. The other customers watched in respectful silence, witnessing a moment of connection between warriors of different eras. As the veterans moved on, Mary noticed several people wiping away tears. Throughout the day, small gestures of appreciation appeared. Someone left a folded American flag on her register with a note that read, "True service never ends." A group of Girl Scouts came in with their troop leader, each one holding handmade thank you cards. Even the notorious coupon lady, who usually complained about everything, simply smiled and said, "Thank you for your service, all of it." During her lunch break, Mary found a quiet moment to check her phone. Among the numerous messages was one from her old commanding officer. "Saw the news. Still leading from the front, I see. Your actions remind us all that the values we serve, courage, duty, service to others, don't end with retirement. Proud to have served with you, Colonel." As the afternoon wore on, Mary noticed something else. Customers were treating all the staff differently, with more respect and consideration. She overheard one woman telling her children, "Remember, you never know who might be standing behind that register. Every person deserves our respect." The lesson was spreading, creating ripples of change in how people viewed service industry workers. By the end of her shift, Mary had been interviewed by 3 news outlets, received countless handshakes and thank yous, and had her picture taken more times than during her entire military career. Yet through it all, she maintained the same professional demeanor, the same focus on service that had characterized both her military and civilian careers. As she prepared to leave, Tom approached her one last time. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "you've taught us all something important, not just about bravery or service, but about dignity in every role, about bringing your best self to whatever you do." He paused, then added with a smile, "Though I have to admit, I'm going to feel a lot better knowing you're here during inventory next week." Mary laughed, the first real laugh since the incident. "Well," she replied, "inventory might not be quite as exciting as yesterday, but it's still important work." She gathered her belongings, ready to head home. "That's what I learned in the military, Tom. Every mission matters, whether it's leading troops in combat or helping customers with their groceries. It's all about service, just in different uniforms." A week after the incident, life at SuperValue Mart had settled into a new normal. The media frenzy had largely subsided, though occasional customers still came in hoping to meet the hero cashier. Mary maintained her usual routine, arriving 15 minutes early each morning, treating every customer with the same respectful efficiency that had characterized her service both in and out of uniform. The store had undergone subtle changes. A new plaque hung near the entrance, commemorating the events of that stormy afternoon. Beside it, Tom had installed a wall of service, featuring photos and stories of employees who had served in various capacities: military veterans, former Peace Corps volunteers, retired first responders. Mary's photo was there, but at her request, it was no larger than the others. James Davidson had become a regular customer, no longer just rushing through on lunch breaks. He would wait in Mary's line even when others were shorter, often bringing young executives from his firm. "This is the woman I told you about," he would say, no trace of his former arrogance. "She taught me more about leadership in one afternoon than I learned in 20 years of management seminars." On this particular morning, Mary noticed a familiar face in her line. The young mother with the 2 children from the day of the incident. The children looked different now, more confident. The younger ones still clutched the same stuffed bear, but smiled brightly when they saw Mary. The mother stepped forward, holding an envelope. "We've been meaning to come back," she said softly. "My son drew this for you." She handed Mary a crayon, drawing, showing a figure in a green vest standing tall, surrounded by what appeared to be a golden light. Written in childish scrawl at the bottom were the words, "My hero." Mary accepted it with the same gravity she had once received military commendations. Later that afternoon, Detective Martinez returned to the store, not for official business, but as a customer. As Mary rang up her groceries, the detective shared an update. The suspect confessed to everything, said he never expected to encounter someone with your training in a supermarket. His exact words were, "Who would have thought a cashier could move like that?" They both smiled at the irony. Mary's fellow employees had changed too. Jenny, the young cashier who had once seemed intimidated by difficult customers, now carried herself with new confidence. She had enrolled in first aid classes and started a store safety committee. "You showed me that being prepared matters," she told Mary during their break, "that we can make a difference wherever we are." Tom had implemented new training programs with Mary's help, teaching basic security awareness and customer service skills. "It's not just about preventing robberies," she explained during one session. "It's about being aware, being professional, being ready to help people in whatever way they need." The lessons from her military career found new applications in civilian life. The local veterans community had embraced Mary as one of their own, though she never sought special recognition. At their monthly meetings, she would quietly share her perspective on transitioning to civilian life, helping others understand that service could continue long after the uniform came off. Her story became an inspiration for veterans struggling to find their place in civilian society. One afternoon, a group of high school students came in on a career day field trip. Their teacher, recognizing Mary, asked if she would speak to them briefly. Mary agreed, stepping away from her register during her break. "Some people think certain jobs are beneath them," she told the students, "but dignity isn't in the uniform you wear or the title you hold. It's in how you serve others, how you carry yourself, how you respond when challenges arise." The store's security guards now carried themselves differently, influenced by Mary's example. She had worked with them on proper observation techniques and professional bearing, sharing lessons learned from years of military experience. "You don't need combat training to be effective," she explained. "You need awareness, discipline, and respect for yourself and others." Even the store's atmosphere had changed. Customers were more patient, more courteous, not just with Mary but with all the staff. The story of the veteran cashier had sparked conversations about respect, service, and the dangers of judging people based on their current occupation. Regular customers would often share how the incident had changed their perspective on retail workers and veterans alike. Mary kept the crayon drawing in her locker next to the photo of her unit. Together they represented the continuity of service, from battlefield to checkout counter, from commanding troops to helping customers. Each morning, as she prepared for her shift, these reminders helped ground her in her chosen path. The Medal of Valor ceremony at City Hall had been brief at Mary's request. She accepted the award with characteristic humility, using her speech to highlight the importance of treating all people with respect and dignity. "Whether you're leading soldiers or scanning groceries," she had said, "your responsibility is to serve others to the best of your ability." As another busy day at SuperValue Mart drew to a close, Mary reflected on how a single incident had rippled out to touch so many lives. Not just in the immediate saving of lives during the robbery attempt, but in the lasting changes to how people viewed service, dignity, and the unexpected ways heroes could appear in everyday life. She straightened her name tag one last time, a gesture that now carried meaning for everyone who recognized it, and prepared to head home, ready to return tomorrow for another day of service in a different kind of uniform. 1 month after the incident, Mary arrived at SuperValue Mart to find a television crew setting up in the parking lot. A producer rushed forward, explaining they were filming a documentary about veterans in civilian life. Mary politely declined to be interviewed, just as she had with dozens of other media requests. Her father had taught her long ago that true service spoke for itself. Inside, the store hummed with its usual morning activity, but there was a different energy now. The wall of service had grown, featuring not just veterans, but stories of everyday heroism from the staff. A teenage bagger who had performed the Heimlich maneuver on a choking customer, a custodian who had helped deliver a baby in the parking lot during a snowstorm. Each story reinforced what Mary had always known, that extraordinary moments could emerge from ordinary lives. James Davidson's corporate office had implemented a new hiring initiative, actively recruiting veterans for positions at all levels. He'd become a regular speaker at business conferences, sharing how his encounter with Mary had transformed his perspective on leadership and service. His company's internal newsletter now featured a monthly column titled Lessons from Register 7, exploring themes of humility, service, and hidden strength. The young mother and her children had become regular customers, always choosing Mary's line. The little boy's stuffed bear now wore a tiny supermarket vest matching Mary's. Other children in the community had started playing supermarket heroes alongside their usual games of cops and robbers, imagining themselves as brave cashiers protecting their customers. During her lunch break, Mary sat in the break room, reading a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from a veteran in Ohio who had read about her story. "I've been struggling since leaving the service," he wrote, "feeling like civilian jobs were somehow beneath me. Your example showed me that service is service, whether it's in combat boots or work shoes. Yesterday, I accepted a job as a bus driver. It's not what I imagined doing after the military, but now I see it differently. Every day, I'll be responsible for getting children safely to school. That's a mission worth taking on." The store's training program had evolved, with Mary quietly contributing her expertise. New employees learned not just about operating registers and stocking shelves, but about situational awareness, crisis management, and the importance of carrying oneself with dignity regardless of the task. Tom had started calling it the Stark Method, though Mary insisted it was simply about applying universal principles of service and leadership. Local businesses had taken notice. Other stores in the shopping centre had begun implementing similar training programs, creating a ripple effect of professionalism and preparedness throughout the community. The Chamber of Commerce had even established an annual award for exceptional service, named in Mary's honour despite her protests. The security camera footage from that day had become a training tool for law enforcement and retail security across the country, not just for the tactical aspects of the takedown, but for what it represented, the importance of staying ready, of maintaining skills, of bringing one's full capabilities to every role. Mary had reluctantly agreed to let it be used, understanding that her experience could help others prepare for similar situations. As she finished her lunch break, Mary noticed a new employee, Kevin, struggling to master the register. He was a recent hire, a young veteran who had served in the Marines. She watched as he apologized to customers for his slowness, his confidence. Wavering, after her break, she approached him quietly. "You know," she said, keeping her voice low and friendly, "when I first started here, I had to adjust too. Different equipment, different protocols, but the same basic principle: accomplish the mission while taking care of people." Kevin straightened slightly, recognizing the military cadence in her words. "The skills that served you in the Marines. Attention to detail, dedication to duty, commitment to excellence. They matter here too, just in a different way." The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Mary's old commanding officer, now retired himself. He waited patiently in her line, watching her interact with customers with the same precision and professionalism she had once brought to military briefings. When he reached her register, he smiled. "You know, Stark," he said, "watching you here, I finally understand something. We don't stop being soldiers just because we take off the uniform. We just find new ways to serve." As the day wound down, Mary took a moment to straighten the items in her register area, making sure everything was prepared for tomorrow's shift. The store's closing announcements echoed through the aisles, and the last customers made their way to the exits. Through the windows, she could see the television crew still set up in the parking lot, still hoping for an interview. Tom approached as she prepared to leave. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about what you've brought to this store. It's not just about what happened that day with the robbery. It's about how you've shown us all that every job has dignity, every role matters, every day is an opportunity to serve others. You've changed how we see ourselves." Mary smiled, adjusting her name tag one final time before clocking out. "We all have something to contribute, Tom. Sometimes it just takes a moment of crisis for people to see it." She gathered her belongings, ready to head home. The real challenge is remembering it during the quiet times, the routine days, the ordinary moments. That's where true service happens. As she walked through the parking lot, the television crew began packing up their equipment. Another interview. Request unfulfilled. But Mary didn't mind. She knew the real story wasn't in dramatic reenactments or news headlines. It was in the daily acts of service, the quiet professionalism, the constant readiness to help others. It was in the lesson she had learned long ago and continued to demonstrate every day at Register 7, that a hero isn't defined by their uniform, but by their heart. 6 months after the incident, Mary arrived at SuperValue Mart to find an unusual sight: a group of cadets from the local ROTC program waiting by the entrance, standing at parade rest in their crisp uniforms. Their instructor, a retired master sergeant, stepped forward as Mary approached. "Lieutenant Colonel Stark," he said formally, "we were hoping you might spare a few minutes to speak with our cadets. They've been studying different forms of leadership, and your story has become part of our curriculum." Mary checked her watch. Still 15 minutes before her shift. She had maintained her military punctuality even as her story had become a case study in leadership schools across the country. The young faces before her reminded her of her own early days in uniform, when she was still learning that leadership went far beyond rank and title. Inside the store, Tom had transformed the training program completely. What had started as basic retail operations had evolved into a comprehensive course on professional development. Veterans from various branches of service now regularly volunteered as mentors, sharing their experiences of transitioning to civilian life. Mary's register had become known as the leadership lane, with managers from major corporations sometimes waiting in line just to observe her approach to customer service. The morning sun cast long shadows through the store's windows as Mary spoke to the cadets. "Leadership isn't about the position you hold," she explained, adjusting her name tag with the same precision she once gave to her officers' insignia. "It's about being ready to serve, to step up when needed, and to maintain your standards even when no one's watching. Whether you're leading troops in combat or helping a customer find the right product, the principles remain the same." James Davidson had made good on his promise to change his corporate culture. His company now ran a successful veteran recruitment program, and he had established a scholarship fund for veterans pursuing civilian education. The fund's name? The Register 7 Leadership Grant. Mary had initially protested the name, but Davidson had insisted. "That register," he'd said, "was where I learned what real leadership looks like." The young mother and her children had become symbols of their own. The local elementary school had invited them to speak during Career Day, sharing their perspective on the incident. The youngest child, still carrying his now famous teddy bear, had told his classmates, "Heroes don't always look like superheroes. Sometimes they look like regular people, but they're ready to help when we need them." Mary's influence had spread far beyond the store's walls. Other businesses in the area had started their own versions of the Wall of Service, recognizing employees who brought military precision and dedication to their civilian roles. The local community college had even developed a course on transitional leadership, using Mary's story as a central case study in how military skills could translate to civilian success. Kevin, the young Marine veteran she had mentored, had blossomed in his role. He now trained new cashiers, incorporating lessons from his military service into his teaching style. "Attention to detail," he would tell them, "isn't just about counting change correctly. It's about being aware, being prepared, being ready to serve in whatever way is needed." The security footage from that day had become more than just a training tool. It had evolved into a symbol of hidden strength, of the extraordinary capabilities that often lay beneath ordinary appearances. Law enforcement academies used it to teach about crisis response, while business schools analyzed it for lessons in leadership under pressure. Mary had finally agreed to record a commentary track, explaining her thought process during those crucial moments. As she prepared for her shift, Mary noticed something new on the Wall of Service, a collection of letters from various people whose lives had been touched by her example. Veterans who had found new purpose in civilian jobs, managers who had transformed their leadership style, young people inspired to serve their communities in whatever way they could. The wall had become a testament to the ripple effect of one person's commitment to service. The morning rush began as usual, but there was a different quality to it now. Customers didn't just come for groceries, they came for the experience of what Tom had started calling service excellence in action. Mary maintained her same efficient professional approach, treating each customer with equal respect and attention, from the CEO who waited in her line to study her technique, to the elderly woman counting out pennies for her bread and milk. During her break, Mary received an unexpected call from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. They were developing a new program to help veterans transition to civilian life, and they wanted her input. "Your story," the secretary said, "has changed how we think about veteran success. It's not just about finding high-powered jobs, it's about finding ways to continue serving, whatever form that takes." As she hung up the phone, Mary noticed Kevin teaching a new employee the proper way to arrange items on the conveyor belt. "It's like preparing equipment for inspection," she heard him say. "Everything has its place, its purpose, its role in the mission." She smiled, recognizing her own lessons being passed on through a new generation of server leaders. The afternoon brought a visit from a group of corporate consultants, tablets in hand, taking notes on what they called the Stark method. Mary continued her work without fanfare, demonstrating rather than explaining her approach. Every movement was purposeful, every interaction professional, every moment an opportunity to serve. The consultants furiously scribbled notes, trying to capture something that couldn't be reduced to bullet points: the essence of true service leadership. 1 year after the incident, Mary stood before Register 7, preparing for what would be her last day at SuperValue Mart, not because she was retiring, far from it. The store had become a national model for veteran employment and leadership development, and she had been asked to help implement similar programs across the country. Though she had initially resisted leaving her register, she had finally accepted that her mission had evolved, just as it had so many times during her military career. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting the same familiar patterns across the polished floors. The store had changed in subtle but significant ways over the past year. The Wall of Service had expanded into a full-scale heritage hall, celebrating not just military service, but all forms of community contribution. Photos, stories, and testimonials lined the walls, telling tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. James Davidson had become more than just a regular customer. He had transformed into a leading advocate for veteran employment in the corporate world. His company's Register 7 initiative had helped place hundreds of veterans in meaningful civilian roles, focusing not just on executive positions, but on all levels of service. "Every role has dignity," he would say in his corporate speeches. A lesson I learned the hard way from a cashier who turned out to be a hero. As Mary arranged her register for the morning rush, she reflected on the changes she had witnessed. The young mother and her children had become regular speakers at community events, sharing their story of how prejudice and heroism could exist in the most unexpected places. The little boy's teddy bear, still wearing its miniature store vest, had become a symbol of the program, replicated and given to children of veterans transitioning to civilian work. Kevin, the former Marine she had mentored, now ran the store's training program, incorporating military precision and values into everyday retail operations. Under his guidance, the store had developed a reputation for excellence that attracted visitors from across the country. Business schools sent observers to study what they called the SuperValue model of leadership development. The morning's customers began to arrive, many of them regulars who had been there on that fateful day a year ago. They lined up at Register 7, not because it was the fastest, but because they wanted to be part of Mary's final day. Each interaction carried a weight of meaning, a recognition that they were witnessing the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. An elderly veteran in his career war cap waited patiently in line, clutching a single loaf of bread. When he reached Mary's register, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Colonel," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've shown us all that the uniform may change, but the service never ends." Mary returned his salute with precision, honor, recognizing honor across generations of service. The security guards, now trained in what had become known as Stark protocols, carried themselves with new confidence and professionalism. They weren't just watching for shoplifters, they were guardians of a space that had become something more than just a supermarket. It had become a symbol of how ordinary places could transform into extraordinary communities. During her break, Mary sat in the break room one last time, looking at the photo of her unit that had accompanied her throughout her time at the store. Tom joined her, carrying a stack of letters from employees and customers who had been touched by her presence. "You know," he said, settling into a chair, "when you first applied here, I thought we were just getting a reliable cashier. Instead, we got a revolution in how we think about service, leadership, and dignity in work." Mary smiled, remembering her first day, how she had approached the job with the same dedication she had given to her military duties. "I just did what I was trained to do, Tom. Serve others, maintain standards, be ready when needed." The uniform changed, but the mission remained the same. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, corporate executives studying her methods, veterans seeking advice on their own transitions, community members wanting to say goodbye. Each person had a story about how Mary's example had influenced them, how her quiet dignity and unwavering professionalism had changed their perspective on service and leadership. A group of business school students arrived, notebooks in hand, eager to observe what their professors had described as authentic leadership in action. They watched as Mary handled each transaction with precision and care, noting how she maintained military bearing even in the most mundane tasks. One student raised his hand, asking, "But isn't this job beneath someone with your qualifications?" Mary paused in her work, fixing the student with the same steady gaze she had once used to evaluate young officers. "No job that serves others is beneath anyone," she replied. "The question isn't whether a role is worthy of us, but whether we are worthy of the role we've been given." As the day wore on, more stories emerged. A teenage cashier revealed how Mary's example had inspired her to join the Air Force Reserve. A customer shared how witnessing Mary's actions had prompted him to volunteer at the local Veterans Center. Each story added to the tapestry of influence that had grown from that one dramatic day a year ago. The local news crew arrived for a final interview, but Mary declined as she always had. Instead, she pointed them toward the wall of service, where countless stories told of lives changed and perspectives shifted. "The story isn't about me," she explained. "It's about how service can take many forms and how every role carries the potential for excellence and impact." James Davidson arrived late in the afternoon, carrying a small package. Inside was a name, Tag, identical to the one Mary wore, but engraved with words that brought tears to her eyes. "Lieutenant Colonel Mary Stark, teacher of true service." He handed it to her with uncharacteristic humility. "Everything I thought I knew about leadership changed because of you," he said. "This is just a small token of what you've taught us all." As closing time approached, Tom gathered the staff for a final meeting. The store had never closed early before, but today was an exception. Employees from all shifts had come in, forming a circle in the main aisle. One by one, they shared how Mary's presence had influenced them, how her example had changed their approach to their work, their understanding of service, their sense of purpose. Mary listened to their stories, standing at parade rest, her bearing as military precise as it had been on her first day. When they finished, she spoke briefly, her words carrying the weight of both military command and humble service. "Remember," she said, "that every interaction is an opportunity to serve, every task a chance to excel, every moment a choice to bring your best self to whatever role you've been given." As she prepared to leave for the last time, Mary took one final look at Register 7. What had begun as a simple job, a way to continue serving after military retirement, had evolved into something far more significant. She had shown that leadership wasn't about position or title, that service wasn't limited to any particular uniform, that dignity could be found in any role approached with dedication and purpose. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. A group of veterans stood at attention, forming an impromptu honor guard. They had come from across the region, some in business suits, others in work clothes, all standing straight and proud. As Mary walked between their ranks, each one saluted, honoring not just her military service, but the example she had set in civilian life. Her car waited in its usual spot, 15 spaces from the door, the same precision she had maintained every day. But today, a small crowd had gathered around it. The young mother and her children stepped forward, the little boy still clutching his teddy bear in its store vest. "We wanted to be here," the mother said, "to thank you one last time for showing us what a hero really looks like." Mary looked back at the store one final time, at the place where she had demonstrated that true service knows no uniform, that leadership can emerge in the most unexpected places, that dignity isn't in the role, but in how we fulfill it. Tomorrow, she would begin her new mission, helping other veterans find their path in civilian life. But she knew that a part of her would always remain at Register 7, where a simple choice to serve had transformed not just a store, but an entire community's understanding of heroism, leadership, and the enduring value of service in all its forms.